Do you ever find yourself feeling like you've finally earned a bit of peace, only to discover that the world still has some dark tricks up its sleeve? I thought I had seen it all by the time I hit 55. I had the scars, both literal and figurative, to show for it. A career in security wasn't glamorous, but it kept me busy, kept me useful, and above all, kept me fed. So when the night shift security job at the Stop and Save opened up, I took it. It wasn't glamorous, but I figured it'd be easy money. Show up, stay awake, watch the place, and leave. Routine stuff. The Stop and Save was on the edge of town, half lit by a neon sign that flickered more than it glowed. I pulled into the empty parking lot, turned off the engine, and sat there for a minute, just taking it in. The silence felt thick, almost too dense for a place that was supposedly open 24/7. I took a breath, stepped out of the car, and headed inside. The automatic doors opened with a soft hum, and the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant hit me right away. There was something heavy about the air, like the store had been closed up for hours instead of open, and every creak and buzz seemed to echo. A small place with narrow aisles, the hum of fluorescent lights, and rows of neatly stocked shelves. Empty, but something about it felt heavier than it should. "Hey, you must be Alex." I looked up, and there was a young woman behind the counter, mid-20s, giving me a half smile. She looked friendly enough, but tired, like she'd had one too many long nights here. "That's me," I said, giving her a nod. She extended her hand across the counter, and I shook it. "I'm Anna, pleased to meet you." She had a steady grip, more solid than I expected. She pulled her hand back, and I noticed a slim silver bracelet on her wrist. It looked worn, like it had been polished over time. "Nice bracelet," I said, glancing at it. "Oh, thanks," she replied, looking down at it and twisting it slightly. "It was my dad's. I've just kept it with me since. One of those things, you know." I nodded, not pressing further. "Makes sense." She cleared her throat, switching to a more practical tone. "So, before I go out for a smoke, I'm supposed to go over some special rules this place has. They're kind of random, but management's big on them." I raised an eyebrow, playing along. "Like, I get it, it's late, and all sorts of weird people can come here. But it's usually quiet, and honestly, I just follow them because they pay me to. Stopped questioning it a long time ago." "Fair enough," I replied with a shrug. "So, what are these big rules?" "All right, so first up," she started, leaning on the counter. "Don't leave the store alone after dark. Management insists. Wait, we're not allowed to leave? What, they think we'll get lost out there?" She shrugged. "I mean, I don't always follow it. I step out for a smoke sometimes, so not the end of the world." "The next rule is a weird one," she added, looking down as she fidgeted with her bracelet. "If someone's acting strange, anyone at all, you're supposed to keep them in view. Don't ever turn your back on them." Sounds like a scene out of a horror movie. "You ever actually needed to follow that one?" I asked. "Nah, not really," she replied, a bit amused. "Never really made much sense to me, but hey, it's their rule. I figure if someone still has the energy to act strange at 2 a.m., that's their business. I sure don't." "Sounds like a normal night to me," I joked. She laughed, seeming more relaxed. "And the last rule, if the lights are off in the storage room, don't go in." I know, it sounds strange, but I never go near it when it's dark. Gives me the creeps. Her tone was light, but her expression shifted slightly, almost as if she was remembering something unpleasant. "Good enough for me," I said. "So don't leave alone. Keep an eye on anyone acting weird and don't go in the storage room if it's dark. Got it?" "Yep, that's it," she said, nodding. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Oh, and by the way, management had me give you access to the security cameras. She tapped her screen, opened an app, and passed her phone over to me. Just log in with this, and you can see all the feeds. They say it's for added safety, and to make sure we can watch the store from anywhere. I like it, honestly. It makes me feel a little safer knowing I don't have to be near the screens the whole time. Smart, I said, nodding as I accepted her phone and logged in on mine. Thanks, Anna. That's actually comforting. She smiled again, slipping her phone back into her pocket. All right, I'm heading out for a quick smoke. Store's all yours. Sure, enjoy your break, I replied, watching her head outside. The store settled into an eerie silence, the faint hum of the lights and the quiet rows of shelves stretching out in front of me. It felt empty, but with each shadowed aisle disappearing into darkness, I couldn't shake a strange sense of something. Not quite unease, but a quiet, nagging feeling I couldn't explain. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the newness of the place. The first night's always the hardest, after all. About 20 minutes later, the front door opened. Anna walked back in, rubbing her arms like she'd been standing out in a snowstorm instead of just outside. Feels colder out there than I thought, she muttered. Long smoke break, I said, trying to keep it light. Did you go through a whole pack? She laughed, but it sounded off somehow. Needed a few extras tonight. Guess I've been feeling a little off lately. I shrugged, figuring everyone had those days. She gave a quick glance around the store, then went back behind the counter. Yeah, winter nights can be brutal, I replied, trying to keep things light. She just nodded without much reaction, her gaze drifting out across the aisles. I continued my rounds, walking up and down each aisle like she'd suggested. But every time I glanced back toward the counter, Anna's eyes seemed to be following me, watching as I moved through the store. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just her being a little bored, or maybe zoning out. It was late after all. But as I rounded a corner, I felt that nagging sense of being watched again. I turned and saw Anna a few feet down the aisle, standing perfectly still, her eyes fixed on me. I opened my mouth to say something, but the words caught in my throat. Just as suddenly, she looked down and grabbed a nearby item off the shelf, acting as though she hadn't been watching me at all. I chuckled, though it came out forced, breaking the silence. Everything all right? Oh yeah, she replied, her voice soft. Just making sure everything's in place. Her words came out slowly, almost like she was figuring out what to say. I shrugged it off and walked a few aisles over, still feeling unsettled. But as I was moving through the store, I caught a glimpse of her again, this time a little closer, staring with that same blank expression. When I turned to look, she immediately turned away, pretending to be busy with the shelves again. My mind flashed back to the second rule. If someone's behavior seems strange, keep them in sight, and don't turn your back on them. It seemed like such a ridiculous rule at first, but now, something in the pit of my stomach told me to follow it. I watched her from the corner of my eye, catching her glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Every time I looked directly at her, she'd find something else to do. Maybe it was just paranoia, but it was unsettling enough that I decided I'd keep her in view when I could. A few minutes later, she must have noticed me watching her, because she suddenly stopped her strange behavior and walked briskly back to the counter. I watched her go, the discomfort still gnawing at me. After a while, I came back up toward the front, figuring I'd make some small talk and try to ease the tension. Feels like nothing ever happens in a place this quiet, I said, trying to break the silence. She smirked, glancing up at me. You get used to it. It's a lot of empty time, but hey, beats dealing with crowds. She leaned forward on the counter, her arms crossed. You get used to filling the gaps with, I don't know, daydreaming. Thinking about what you'd do if you were anywhere else. Where would you be if you could? I asked, genuinely curious. It was a pretty normal question, but I was trying to see if anything was really off about her, or if I was just overthinking it. She tilted her head, as if she had to think about it. Somewhere warmer, I guess. What about you? You got any big plans? Me? At this point, I'd be happy with a beach, some sun, and a decent drink, I replied. I've done enough night shifts for a lifetime. She nodded, a distant look crossing her face. The beach? That sounds nice. Her voice trailed off, her gaze slipping down the aisles. The store settled back into silence, the hum of the fluorescents and the faint ticking of the clock filling the quiet. After a few minutes, I felt my pulse slow a little. Maybe I was just imagining things. Hey, Alex. Her voice cut through my thoughts. Yeah, I replied, forcing my voice to stay casual. Could you grab me something from the storage room? There's a cleaning spray in there, on the top shelf. Too tired to go myself, she said, her tone light, but her gaze a little too steady. Sure, I said cautiously, heading toward the storage room, though every instinct told me to stay out of there. As I approached, I noticed the light was off, and a chill crept up my spine. I stopped just outside the door, unease curling in my stomach. The light's out, I called back to Anna, hoping she'd tell me it could wait until later. Her voice came calmly from behind the counter. Just use your phone flashlight. It's easy to find, just on the top shelf. I hesitated, her words echoing oddly in my mind. She told me earlier to avoid the storage room if it was dark, even mentioned how she didn't like going near it without the light on, but now she was urging me in? All right, I replied, swallowing hard. I pulled out my phone, switched on the flashlight, and stepped into the room, letting the darkness close around me. I didn't venture far, just enough to be out of sight from the doorway, positioning myself in the shadows. My hands were trembling as I opened the security app she'd set up for me, needing to confirm what I couldn't quite admit to myself. I quickly flipped through the feeds, my breath catching as the image came into view. On the screen, I saw her. Anna was moving down the aisle toward the storage room, her pace slow and almost silent, her gaze fixed dead ahead. She held a large wrench, gripping it tightly in her hand, and I watched as she raised it above her head, poised to strike. Her face was devoid of any expression, her eyes empty, a chilling absence of the friendly, exhausted person I'd met just hours earlier. My stomach twisted, my pulse hammering in my chest. She was coming for me. I slipped the phone into my pocket and grabbed the fire extinguisher mounted near the entrance. My fingers tightened around it as I waited, hidden in the dark, listening as her footsteps drew closer. The footsteps slowed, stopping just outside the door. I could feel her presence on the other side, the silence between us thick, electric. And then she took a step forward, crossing the threshold. I swung from the darkness, slamming the extinguisher into her head with everything I had. The impact sent her wrench clattering to the floor as she stumbled back, crumpling to the ground. I didn't stay to find out more. I turned and ran, bolting out of the storage room and through the back exit, the cool night air hitting me like a shock as I reached the outside. I tried to make sense of what had just happened. What was wrong with Anna? What had I done to make her behave this way? It didn't add up. Only hours ago she'd been friendly, a little weary, but kind. What had turned her into this cold, unrecognizable figure ready to strike? I rubbed my eyes, trying to steady myself, but every step forward only seemed to bring more questions. And then, just as I reached the far side of the dumpster, something else caught my eye. There, faintly illuminated by the distant glow of the streetlight, was a dark stain on the concrete. It was thick, fresh, and unmistakably blood. I took a few cautious steps toward it, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run. But something stronger, maybe fear, maybe some twisted sense of duty, pushed me forward. My heart raced as I crouched down, following the trail as it wound around the side of the dumpster, leading to something partially hidden in the shadows. I approached slowly, each step heavier than the last. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw it. Something crumpled on the ground, slumped lifelessly against the wall. It was a body, skin pale and stretched, patches of raw, red tissue peeking through where the flesh seemed stripped away, as if whoever had done this had no care for the person it had once been. The shape was human, but only barely. Whoever this was, they'd been subjected to something horrific, something beyond words. I stepped back, bile rising in my throat as I tried to look away, the sheer grotesque reality of it pressing down on me. My mind reeled, searching for answers, and a horrifying thought began to claw its way to the surface. Could this be Anna? No, it couldn't be. Anna had been inside with me just moments ago. But then, who was this? Then, my gaze landed on something that turned my blood to ice. Around the wrist, half covered in the remains of what was once skin, was a thin silver bracelet. Worn, polished, unmistakable. I'd seen it before, just hours ago, on Anna's wrist, as she'd told me it had belonged to her father. My breath caught in my throat, realization washing over me like cold water. This was Anna, the real Anna, the friendly, tired cashier who'd introduced herself so warmly, the same person I'd joked with, the same person who had shown me the security app, the one who'd given me her trust. But if Anna was here, then who or what had I been talking to inside the store? My thoughts swirled, the edges of my vision going dark as the reality settled in. I hadn't been dealing with Anna. I'd been dealing with something that had worn her skin, something that had taken her face, her voice, and moved through the store as if it belonged. I stumbled back, my breath shallow, my mind scrambling to make sense of the impossible. With shaking hands, I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911. My fingers numb as I listened to the line connect. "Please," I whispered, barely able to form the words. "Please send someone to the stop and save on 26 Market Road. There's a body. My coworker. She's been..." I couldn't finish, the horror of what lay before me stealing the words from my mouth. Before I could say more, a sound crept into the silence, a soft creak of footsteps from the shadows behind me. I turned, heart pounding, and there she was, the imposter Anna. She stood a few feet away, her expression twisted into a cold, mocking smile that sent a chill down my spine. Her eyes gleamed with dark satisfaction, a look that no longer tried to mimic friendliness. There was no disguise left, no mask. She was looking at me, fully aware that I knew exactly what she was. In a heartbeat, she closed the distance between us, grabbing me by the collar and slamming me back against the dumpster. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the ground, the faint sounds of the 911 operator crackling from the screen. She leaned in close, her voice a low, taunting whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "Almost got away, didn't you?" I barely had time to process her words before she bent down, her fingers curling around a loose brick on the ground. She lifted it slowly, holding it above her head, her eyes locked onto mine with an unblinking intensity, her lips curling into a twisted smile. But just as it was about to strike, the distant wail of sirens cut through the air, red and blue lights flashing across the back wall of the store. She froze, her expression twisting with rage and frustration. Her gaze flickered to the approaching lights, then back to me, a dark promise in her eyes. Before I could even blink, she turned and ran into the shadows, disappearing into the thick line of trees just beyond the parking lot, swallowed by the night. I collapsed against the dumpster, my body shaking as the officers rushed toward me, their voices distant and muffled as they helped me to my feet. I tried to explain, the words tumbling out in broken fragments, but all I could do was point to the grotesque scene behind the dumpster, where Anna's body lay discarded like a crumpled piece of paper, her bracelet catching the faint light and a haunting reminder of who she once was. In the days that followed, the police confirmed what I had feared, but still struggled to accept. The body they found was indeed Anna, her skin removed, her form hollowed out, left behind like an empty shell. There was no trace of the thing that had worn her face, no clue where it had gone or what it had really been. It was as if it had never existed at all, vanishing into the night without a single piece of evidence, leaving behind only an echo of horror in its wake. And now I live with the gnawing fear that it is still out there, somewhere in the world, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the next moment to strike. I see it in every shadow, in every fleeting reflection, in every stranger's gaze that lingers too long. Every time I close my eyes, I see the twisted, empty expression it wore as it raised that brick, that mocking smile that seemed to promise we'd meet again. Some nights, I lie awake, staring into the darkness, unable to shake the feeling that one day it'll come back to finish what it started. And when that day comes, I wonder if I'll even see it coming, or if it'll simply slip back into my life, wearing another stolen face, just like before.